minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey, my friends, welcome to another week of the Launch Sequence Podcast, episode 125. And we're well past the CitizenCon hype, but we're still also thick in it. And today's conversation is coming from CitizenCon. We're talking about server meshing today, but we're also talking about engine advancements in general. We're going to touch on the quantum economy, a little bit of replication layer stuff, but generally the back end of Star Citizen. Why is server meshing so important? And how important is it actually? I was just saying before the podcast with these guys that one of the things that bugs me about talking about server meshing is how much hyperbole can get involved in the conversation. So I'm bringing in two people who have experience in the field, one of whom has made the unofficial road to server meshing that you may know, the website that a lot of people reference. And I wanted to have a candid conversation, just talk about kind of the technology that's being brought into Star Citizen, what it means realistically in both a real world and video game application, and maybe what it means to the industry, if anything. So thank you so much for joining me today, Unobtanium and PanicSwitch. I want to give you guys a chance to sort of explain who you are and let people know why you're here on the podcast talking about this specific topic. So I'd like to open up to you now. Unobtanium, please start us off. Who are you? What do you do?
Yes, good evening. Hello. I'm a software developer, mainly in the backend areas involved. And I think I've been following Star Citizen now for 10 years and have been interested in development. And especially dynamic server meshing was interesting to me. What's going on there? And 3 years ago, I got interested in putting all my knowledge together on it and sharing it with the world. So that's how the road started, this little presentation, which grew and grew. It's quite big now.
Yeah,
But,
this website, it's like an interactive sort of roadmap from going all the way back to like 2016, 2017, right? Or earlier than that with 64-bit stuff and object container streaming all the way till now.
Yeah, definitely even further. I think the first thing they worked on was the zone system, actually, which now plays a role in server meshing, as we saw. And I think that they started work on that in 2014, actually.
Okay.
And was, but upgraded over time and changed again.
Yeah, server meshing is a surprisingly long-term thing people might not realize that they've been working towards this whole time. It's not like some new thing they just suddenly came up with in the last 4 years, right?
Yeah, I think they previously, in the early years, they wanted to do like instancing, traditional instancing like other MMOs do it. But they changed that in like 2015. They got the idea for this dynamic server meshing solution and have been aiming at that ever since.
Okay. So generally been covering this initiative for almost 10 years now, laying it out in simplified terms and creating interactive guides for it. You have a pretty good grasp of both the tech and kind of where they're coming at it from.
I hope so, yes.
But
I'm never sure. It's like always complicated. It's so much
That's true.
information in different areas of computer science. So it's not easy.
Yeah, that's fair.
Tough. I think it's tough to keep up here.
And our second guest today, PanicSwitch, you also have experience in the field and experience in content creation. Tell us about where you come from and why you wanted to talk about this topic.
So first off, just from the technology perspective, I've been a DevOps and site reliability engineer for going on 10 years now. Before that, I was a level 2 and 3 support technician for a couple of relatively large financial technology companies. In general, if you have a retirement fund or a 401k, you have probably at some point or another interacted with my software that I work on. But in the context, it's pretty much high performance networking and high performance compute and how all of that interacts together. And in more recent years, our companies have been moving towards AWS cloud computing, which, as many people know, it's what CIG is pretty much using for most of their game engine stuff on the network side, which makes things interesting. In terms of Star Citizen, I've been a backer since the Kickstarter. I've I wasn't actually here for Star Citizen. I've been here for Squadron 42, but Star Citizen has wormed its way into my heart, I'll say. And yeah, I've just been following along. And server meshing, I always just found the conversations on the internet to be hilariously uninformed, but also informed at the same time. Um, and I sympathize with CIG because it's not an easy problem to solve, but at the same time, it's not a revolutionary problem to solve, which is why you see such like different comments around it, because people are coming at it from like different angles of what they know. So I think it'll be an interesting talk this time around.
And just for clarity, both of your angles, are they from the game development perspective or outside of the game development industry?
So I'm not a game developer by trade. However, as part of some of my side content creation work that I used to do, I have built quite a strong network of people that I've worked with and spoken with and just dealt with, primarily on the MMO game development side of things. I haven't done that by trade, but my primary aspect there is I do that for financial technology, which draws many parallels because we are all about ultra low latency. Also, just being very responsive, which are different time scales for fintech versus gaming, but similar at the same time.
When I used to hear about server meshing and in the context of people saying, oh yeah, this is done outside of the gaming industry all the time, financial industry was the one that people always pointed to as being like, yeah, this is something that's done pretty commonly over there already.
It's not the same. So it's the concept is similar, but I'll draw an analogy that people might um, kind of relate to a little bit more. There's a reason why if any MMO you have played in the past, almost all of them follow the same design, and you all know what I'm talking about here. You have your action bar at the bottom of the screen. You have a bunch of icons, and then you will press the keys for whatever action you want to do, and then your character on screen will do an animation, and there will be some numbers that pop up on the screen. um, at a high level, your client is doing most of the work there. It's just timing an animation and showing that to you. But ultimately, all that's happening is your machine is sending a very simple byte stream of just commands you have run back to the server, which the server will then interpret and run the rest of the simulation of everyone else running their actions and kind of playing it out. Um, that's very simplistic design in terms of networking, but fundamentally easy to do. What Cloud Imperium, Robert Space Industry, whatever you want to call it, Star Citizen folks are trying to do is very different from that. When you're running around in a first person environment, there's a lot more complex coordinates, actions, and the universe of actions you can take is significantly larger, and I would say more analog. Like when you have your MMO action choices, they are like atomic things you can do. But in Star Citizen, you can run, slide, go into a crouch, bring your gun sights up, and take shots in multiple directions. And all of that information has to be done on your client, but then sent to the servers and then sent out to everyone else who's nearby you so that they can see those actions happen with the fidelity that
So,
everyone
and
talks
this is what kind of makes the particular case more unique for Star Citizen.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, no, go ahead.
Well, we will get to that. You're getting ahead of me here. We're going to talk about that for in a minute. But I do want to, before we get into all of that, Unobtanium, I still wanted to hear your context towards the gaming industry. Do you have any connection to that, or all of what you've learned is through your own time?
Yeah, mostly own time. I mean, my computer science degree helps a little bit because I understand how hardware and software interconnect and stuff and how to program. So a lot of the ways the software is written is similar, I would say.
Okay.
But yeah,
So
I didn't work on a game yet or something. Like
pulling expertise from other industries, though, which
is,
I mean, completely valid in my opinion. But I think it's worth everybody knowing exactly where these are coming from. Now, let's let's dive into this. I want to start with our problems first. Server meshing is a solution to a lot of things. First, I want to ask, what, in your opinions, on the back end causes most of our problems in Star Citizen? Desync or lagging or chugging or crashing or whatever that might be. What do you identify as the problem from your perspective?
Low server tick rate, I think. Besides like bugs which crash the server, of course. Yeah, I think those two.
From my end, I would probably say optimizing on a single server for what they're using, notably RAM, is their constraint right now, and kind of how much they have to load for a particular individual server instance. And then also just being able to stream the relevant information out to which users need it, like calling that information and like sending it out efficiently is probably also one of the reasons why desync is such a problem. It's a tricky problem.
So it all kind of, both of you are saying, it all kind of centers around the server performance.
Yes.
Is that to say that like all of the sort of jank that we experience with Star Citizen comes from that, or is it a sort of a compound effect? Like, are you saying that if server meshing came in and fixed the server tick rate and the desync and the RAM problem you're talking about, are people just suddenly going to be playing a smooth game?
I will say it's switching one set of problems for another set of problems.
Okay.
They will likely fix a large set of them, but at the same time, they're going to introduce a whole new set of problems. I don't necessarily think the new set of problems they're introducing are significantly worse, but I think people are going to have a lot of, I'm going to use a sarcastic word, fun when that actually happens.
Okay. So it's definitely still not necessarily a band-aid, but it's kind of like how PES came in, and while it makes things better, it introduces new issues.
Yeah, and it's an iterative process. No technology goes out smoothly. We can talk about the PES part later. I think that's an interesting conversation to have because it led into a lot of what they talked about for CitizenCon for how they're doing what's next. So
Yeah. Unobtanium, how would you, this is also obviously hypothetically, you guys aren't building the system, but from your perspective, do you feel like with this server tick rate being solved, however that might be done, that would solve most of the problems people are having with the performance?
Yeah, sure. I think it's tricky to nail it down exactly because it's like you have the networking and simulation part, and then you have like netcode, which is like a system even on top of that, right? And I think that also has like weird effects with low tick rate. So I think there's a lot of interconnectedness there, which might be too deep to go into now. But
Okay.
yeah, it's like having two different machines and then latency between that, and then one machine has to predict what the other machine will tell it a little bit. And I think if the server is like taking a second to respond, I think that might mess with it a little bit. And I think if the server has less to do, then it has better tick rate, and then it won't be such an compounding effect, I guess.
One of
Yeah.
the things that I hear is that it's not just like the things you would imagine, like AI or normal data being messed up, but like graphics can be messed up by it too because of the way that data transfer is happening. Like the little things in a game can get screwed up by the servers not performing right that you would never think of. So I'm interested in seeing, like, are those kinds of little rendering problems that we run into, could those also be decreased by progress in server performance?
I
I
don't
don't
think so.
Yeah, that's more of a client side thing. So when they fix that will be fixed more likely when they get the Gen 12 renderer more fully in. Like it's in now. Like
Yeah.
my frames for the past two patches have been incredible.
Hmm.
Like I've been getting like 60 plus FPS on Horizon. It's amazing. And
Oh
I'm
my
running like a
gosh.
giant 45-inch monitor. Like I have a 4090. My hardware is insane, but like I was only getting like 40 before. Like my FPS is god tier now, I would say, compared to what it was.
That has been
but
really.
that would
Go ahead.
no, I was going to say that's like tied to the more of the like local machine and like how they optimize your multi-threadedness. Server meshing will be different things, which we can talk about in a second.
That makes more sense. Yeah. That it is nice though that they're hitting both of those milestones kind of at the same time. Like we're getting client side and server side optimizations, which are having some pretty good effects. I didn't notice any changes in the last couple patches, but earlier this year when they first started dropping in the major parts of Gen 12, I think it was like 3.19 maybe or 3.18. I noticed it then, definitely.
Well, the thing is, those are actually different skill sets. Just from my perspective, historically, I have found network programmers are really bad graphics programmers, and graphics programmers are really bad network programmers. They'll have to think about different types of math,
I bet.
and they're like different like branches of how to like think about things.
I
Yeah,
I can
definitely.
imagine. The little bit I've looked into networking, I can't even look into graphical stuff. So I'm like,
Oh, I don't understand graphics math at all. Like it's like I look at it and my eyes glaze over and I feel really dumb. But like if you put networking in front of me, I'm like, oh yeah, I know how that works. And
well,
I do architecting for that stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
that's why you're here for server meshing and not ray tracing.
Exactly.
I'm
Let's talk
glad
about.
too.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm glad too because I only know projection matrix and that's it. Shaders stuff. Yeah, it's magic to me.
Yeah. See, I don't know any of that stuff, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. I mentioned 3.18 earlier. Before we finally dive into server meshing, let's talk a little bit about PES and what that has done for the game. Last update we got on that, Chris was saying that they had some problems with their third-party service.
Yeah, the
Clearly,
database. Yeah.
hmm? Yeah,
I
yeah,
think the database, right?
yes, yeah, the database provider, and then clearly over the last couple of patches, it's been making the game pretty rough for a lot of people. What is your view on the whole PES situation? How it was implemented, how it's performing now? Do you think that could be a problem going forward?
So I'm not gonna dox the data provider they're talking about. I'm pretty sure I know which one it is. Because I have actually worked with that database in the past. If I'm correct. Also, just some of the looks I got when I mentioned the name, it got some people got like a wry smile. So I'm pretty sure I'm right there. But that's part of it. Persistent entity streaming, like we talked about in the past, is one of the I'm going to classify as apocalyptic changes they had to do to get the game to where it's going, where they want to go. That's effectively the underlying like data format that they want to send across all of the machines that they're talking. When I say machines, I mean you as the client, also the servers picking it up. It's effectively defining what that data structure looks like so that they can send it in various ways. That's the wrapper for what goes around object container streaming and server side object container streaming that they talked about years ago. They're sending that information via the persistent entity streaming tech. Persistent entity streaming, as many people might know, is the replacement for iCache, which is what they tried before. I'm pretty sure Unobtanium would have better knowledge about that because iCache was what's considered the most common database technology, relational databases. And you have to set up everything a certain way for what your data looks like for that. And when that did not work because it wasn't performant enough, and when I say performant, there's a couple of ways you can track it. But the main metric for databases is how fast and how many times per second you can connect, make a change, and get out, and how many of those can happen at the same time. iCache didn't work because they could not have enough people connecting and getting the data at the same time and updating it without it falling apart.
That was a
So
scaling
they had,
problem.
yeah, that was a scaling problem. Persistent entity streaming was switching to another type of database, which is much newer and much less common. It really was, I don't want to say it was invented by Facebook, but it kind of was, which is called a graph database. And in a graph database, instead of just having tables of data, you have your entities, which is where the entity and persistent entity streaming comes from, and the relationships between the entities, where you just draw lines between to link them together. Those lines linking things together are equally as important to the entities themselves. So queries that would be much more complicated in a relational database become much simpler in an entity or graph database. But you have to like re-architect how you write all of your data And my mind hurts thinking about how much code they would have to go in. Because like when you write functions and stuff in code, you have to say, I'm getting this kind of data or I'm getting this kind of object. Persistent entity streaming, like that switch is like saying, we need to go to every function call we have for everything we've built
Ooh,
and change what we're plugging in.
basically what it's referencing, kind of.
Yeah. So for 318, when that came out and they were said, we're ready, I'm like, oh, they're 90% done. And when people were freaking out saying this is horribly unstable and broken, I was looking at it and I'm like, I'm actually surprised this is working as well as it is because of what they had to change under the hood. That it was rough by no stretch of the imagination. It was rough. Like there was a lot of jank. But the other thing I will give CIG credit for was the fact that they fixed it in like 3 months and got it a lot more stable. Like they were like talking about like, oh yeah, we're writing a new service to do this whole thing. And then we're doing this whole thing. And I'm just sitting there being like, man, my team, when we have to fix certain things in my job and we have a lot more funding than, Robert Space Industries does, it takes us months and months and months to like make decisions on how to do these things.
And
And
pay
they're
those people
fixing this on
more.
the fly. Yeah. They're fixing this stuff on the fly. So I was impressed, but at the same time, like the decisions they made for how they're going forward with the apocalyptic changes, I also agree with because they remembered, oh yeah, we're running a live service. It can't be like an absolute clown show when we launch a
Right.
patch.
Yeah, that was bad. They
Yeah,
can't have a 318 again.
yeah. But that said, this was one of those things that they just had to rip the band-aid off and put it in the game.
Mhm.
And like the scale of testing they get with a live service is something you need to hammer this out quickly. Like this is one of those things where I rightly agree with them saying it's all hands on deck fixing this, because without I would argue persistent entity streaming is more foundational than server meshing
Because
in
of
just like what it allows you to do.
because it's the actual database, right? It's
Yep.
the storage
I'm
of
curious what
everything.
I'm curious what Unobtanium thinks about that versus my
Yeah.
opinion on it.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, how did you view the rollout and launching of this Unobtainium?
Uh, yeah, I think I got the news from other people mostly, how it's going down in game, like people not being able to connect and stuff,
Mhm.
or terminals not working. Yeah, I think PanicSwitch summed it up quite well. I can only like add how like they emphasized how much of a change 318 was, like from their code base, how much they changed. Like they prepared the replication layer like in a couple versions prior, but then I think for the 318 update they like ripped everything out and replaced it with a new functionality. They used some new technology like RPC calls for the communication between the services and servers. And yeah, I think that was a huge undertaking, and dropping all of that at once, plus a new database, I think that was like a lot at once. And I think they learned from that. Like they made like this post recently, how they want to roll out future tech in more iterative steps.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they could have done that with PES already, or if it had to be like released that big, such a big patch. But yeah, I don't know.
One of the things I will say that I don't actually blame CIG for with the PES rollout, which is that post that Chris Roberts put out where he was talking about the database vendor. We had a similar experience with the same vendor. They had like advertised numbers for what you can perform, and they actually came in and gave us demos of the technology, and they showed us the tech working at that performance level. But the problem we had was when we tried using it, it would just kind of fall apart in weird ways at that scale. So like CIG probably ended up just being able to go back to the vendor and being like, hey, what you promised us isn't working, which is probably what the vendor has been working on. Like our use case for that database was different, obviously, than CIG's, but it was also different than what the vendor had kind of like advertised for. Um, that said, the vendor did come back and was able to fix the problems for us. Like they were competent. They just had sold us on something they weren't quite aware of either. So I'm assuming it's a
Hon-
similar situation for CIG.
Honestly, that sounds kind of like Star Citizen.
Yeah,
Like,
it's like the vendor sells you something and it's like doesn't do what do it advertised.
yeah. Like eventually they get it working, but at first you go and you try it and you're like, I'm falling through my spaceship. I don't know if this is what's supposed to happen. So the way you guys are talking about PES and that launch in 3.18, it almost sounds like 3.18 could be considered the 4.0. I mean, you said it's arguably as important, if not more, than server meshing. Is the change understated? Like, we kind of just blew through that, complained, and now we're on to the next thing.
So from a user perspective, persistent NA streaming is nonsense. It's magic buzzwords, right? Like from a player of a game, it doesn't mean anything to them. PES for me is really important because I'm a technologist. I understand what it means, what they did with it, probably how they implemented it. But for like, if you're selling a product, PES is a line on the back of the box that you have. It's not like your front line like thing. Server meshing, where you say like you're gonna be like, oh, jumping system to system, that's a selling point.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's
it's
definitely
invisible.
A 4.0. Yeah, that's fair. But in terms of like the actual size of the update, PES versus server meshing, it does sound like you're drawing a lot more emphasis to to PES.
Unobtanium can probably correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm not sure, but from a writing a program standpoint, meshing is like PES is like you're like in the muck. You have to crawl through it. You have to figure it out, and it's going to be hurting you the entire time you're doing it. Meshing is just like a really big wall that once you climb over it and figure it out, implementing it's a little bit more straightforward. And like getting it going. Like PES is just more like it's just going to keep stabbing at you while you're working through it.
Yeah, I think PES was like a central piece of server meshing. Like it's like the clue for server meshing. And yeah, like PanicSwitch said, it's not very flashy for the players.
Okay.
But in the end, it's actually what drives server meshing and what will make it performant. So yeah, it's necessary. It was necessary.
Yeah, definitely it's so interesting to see this journey. And Unobtanium, your website's great for this, but like to literally remember getting into the game with objects container streaming starting to run, and like at that time it's like, yes, look at this, it's improving performance, but at the end of the day it's like, no, this is for server meshing in like 6 years, and to finally be at the point where they're starting to get that stuff, and it's really cool.
Definitely. Yeah, they showed actually in the CitizenCon demo server OCS working, like when one server didn't have to load like the far away other server.
Yeah.
So that was quite nice seeing that in action finally as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. And we're going to get to that. Why don't we start talking about server meshing a little bit and what PanicSwitch was talking about earlier, which is how Star Citizen's version of server meshing is different from other games. Oh my gosh. Excuse me. I just knocked my headphones off my face. How it's different from other games in both that it is maybe something spectacular, but also maybe something that's very similar to other things. I only know about one project that was, or two, Dual Universe and Scavengers. But there are many applications of this kind of stuff. Let's talk about how this shows up in the industry and why Star Citizen is different.
Yeah, I agree. I think Dual Universe was one of the leaders. And then, as you said, like Scavengers as well. But I think that was like spatial.
Ultima Online did it a while back too. They had server meshing.
Okay.
That's actually where the CIG kind of implementation came from. Like Chris Roberts did some stuff with Ultima. He was back at Origin Systems back when they were building Ultima. And the way they did meshing was kind of there, but it was a little different and much easier to exploit back then. But same idea.
And that was what, 2001?
Something like that. It was old. Like I was a lot younger when Ultima was around.
And so there are, what would be, I mean, Ultima could do it 20 years ago. Why is Star Citizen finding it so challenging?
That's where the differences kind of come in now in technology. Most games, like you can think of meshing as the next generation of loading screen almost. A lot of games, they would have you walk through a long hallway that's pretty nondescript where you couldn't see both ends. They might put you in an elevator or something, and that would transition you while they pulled a lot of stuff out
The
and a lot of
old
other stuff in.
the old Mass Effect elevator.
Exactly. Ultima, kind of the way they would do it was like when as you'd go beyond regions, there'll be like the line, and you wouldn't be able to see beyond the line until you crossed that line, and then you can kind of see what's going on the other part, and that would be like you jumping server to server.
Okay.
But the thing
And
with Star Citizen is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, was it also like more static still? Did it already
yeah,
had like
it was-
dynamic functionality? I don't think so, right?
People would jump from line to line constantly
Hmm.
as an exploit.
Yeah, I see.
That was a very common thing back then. But the number one thing is dynamic is a new concept, because really cloud computing has only been around for what, like 15 years now, if even, at a commercially usable scale, where we're talking like Amazon, Google, Microsoft are pretty much advertising infinite capacity for like the regular company to come and use. Back then, if they wanted to do a server mesh, you'd have to buy a lot of servers, rack and stack them, set them up, and then maintain them. And then you generally would want to be like, they didn't have the sophistication in orchestration, is generally what they call it, to like have servers be able to dynamically switch around what they're talking to. The software I work on, we don't have a dynamic mesh. The way we do meshing is through like IP multicast, which is a much older technology. But that's not easy to scale. There's like a ceiling of how high you can scale an IP multicast. CIG is doing it through regular TCP IP connections, which have their own pain points, because like when you have to scale that, you have to kind of like advertise out to everyone on your thing, like, this is the service I need, this is what I'm talking to, and be able to fan all of that out like on the fly. So like that's part of things they have to figure out what to do when they do the meshing. So that's where the complications come in. Most MMOs, when they do their style of what they would call meshing, it's instances and shards. When you jump from one location to another, it'll just like it'll load balance between which instances are available for the other location, and then try to like have some matchmaking logic to be like, oh hey, a bunch of their guild is there, a bunch of their friends are there. We'll try to like pick one that their guild and friends are in, so it looks like they're all in the same world, and then they'll just place them there. They'll go and load in, and then they move on with their life.
Right.
Yeah, this is actually the solution Star Citizen pursued as well in the early years, and then opted for the server meshing solution as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now
think-
with the
I think maybe I'm curious how much instances will appear again in the future. Like if there's going to be some hybrid solution, like we're already going to get like these persistent hangars, instant hangars, and hubs, I think, was it? And I wonder. I think they are aware that, like Chris Roberts himself said, that many thousand players can't be in the same location at the same time because
Right.
our clients can't render it and stuff.
I feel
So
like the
maybe
hab
I
will
wonder
be
if
like
his.
instances.
Sorry, again.
I feel like the habs will be just like instances where they'll just put a bunch of them on a server. One of the things that I thought was actually really interesting, I was talking to one of the ship designers at the party afterwards, and he mentioned that the hab, the kind of like the way it works is like when you're in it, it's just like a space, like it's actually nowhere. It's just like a hangar space you're in. But then when you call the ATC service, that's when it will move that entire hangar to the spot where the door actually opens and you enter the world.
Okay.
And I was like,
Interesting.
that's crazy.
Is that not how it would normally work?
For me, I was like, usually like right now, if you go to the hangar, like you're in that spot.
No. I
world.
mean, if they were instancing, would it not
Yeah.
normally be a case of where you're just kind of like nebulous until you call in and then they put you there?
I don't know what that implementation would be. The fact is, like that, like they're actually moving that entire like block you're in to that spot, which is why they have to like rush you out because otherwise, then that station would be like occupied.
Hmm.
So it's like interesting that they're pretty much treating the hangar almost like an elevator of its own. That they just like move it into position and then you leave.
True.
Can we go back to something you said earlier? When we first started talking about CIG's implementation of server meshing, you said server meshing, I guess maybe is like a simplified example or metaphor, is almost like the next generation of loading screens. And sometimes people talk about how like, yeah, Star Citizen has no loading screens because the whole thing is a loading screen. You're just synchronously loading things in and out of the game. Going back to that statement, is that really, you think we're just moving towards a place where all games are just going to be pockets of servers that hold data that you can access, and that's how we're going to load games?
Well, I mean, if we want to actually talk about it in nuts and bolts, we can talk about the demo they did. Um, and effectively, like you have your zone ABC, which was the 3 rooms in that demo, and they used the replication layer to be able to scale how much they're sending to you without taxing the database too much. But effectively, um, they also worked out how to be able to have 2 completely different machines, which, even though you talk about the cloud, these are 2 completely independent machines that are sitting in a data center somewhere, not really directly connected to each other, showing information to each other, right? In a speed that a human like you and me looking at a screen will not perceive that they are not the same machine,
That's
right?
pretty cool when you put it that way.
Yeah. And then they had us the viewer moving between these 2 machines almost seamlessly. There was a little bit of pausing when you saw like if I were to see you coming across, there was a little bit of jank for you running across on my side, but not much. But figuring out that problem statement is kind of insane because usually in most places they would just use a loading screen and then you would both just like pop in where you were there. But now my loading screen is a little different than your loading screen, right? Like all that's happening is PES is streaming data to me of, hey, your viewport is roughly this, so you should see all of these things. So I'm going to stream them to you so you see them while you're like looking across a room, which might actually be 2 different servers. Um, so yeah, it's not really like a loading screen in the traditional sense anymore. It's like you said, they're just sending you the data you need when you need it, and that's how they load the information in. And they're taking, in order to preserve that memory on the server and on your side, is just taking away what you don't need when you don't need it.
It's pretty crazy. I don't know. I guess the next question I would have would be like, if I were looking at a demo like that from another game's perspective, let's just say like any normal AAA game, well, normal, like the top of the industry game, how would they solve, like what would it look like in that instance if they wanted to have people transition between the rooms of different information or different servers, as you said? What would that look like? Because from what you're saying, it sounds like it would literally just be you hit the barrier, a loading screen happens, you wait a little bit, and then you can enter that next part of the room.
Um, that's generally what most places would do. Like if you look at Destiny 2, they actually have that in some of their missions. There's notoriously one in one of the dungeons, I think, or one of the like instance raids, that you'll be running and they have a very fast-paced sequence of you running and you have to like jump over something, but the loading screen is like at the seam of where you jump over the thing, and it will freeze for a split second as you jump over it, and then it
Hmm.
will freeze again for a second as you jump back. So like I always found that hilarious. um but like from the meshing perspective, um I would probably see, if I was like a battle royale developer, I'd be looking at this thing very closely because that is like the secret sauce for the battle royale folks, for like how to make the map bigger and how to have more players at once. Because like you can take your PUBG map, for example, make it smaller, like smaller segments of it, run those on different servers, and then at different points, you switch between the servers. And the big one that they kind of glossed over, but is actually really important from the CIG demo, is that you can shoot across servers, which
Yeah,
to
that was
me is
crazy.
insanity. I was like, that is insanity that works.
I mean,
So-
like, there's got to be concerns about like shooting a bullet and having it not go in a straight line if you're shooting across a server, right?
I think they'll have to get creative in the way they do the division, which is in that dynamic part, I think,
Uh-huh.
versus the static meshing. But I'm also curious, and again, this is kind of like where I was alluding to. You have to like deal with the edge case, and I'm like, how many servers does a sniper rifle shot go across?
Yeah, or a torpedo from a ship.
Yeah.
Like it'll be interesting. Unobtanium, as somebody who's been following this pretty closely and working on your tool to track this stuff, the demo that they came up with that Panic has been talking about, did that surprise you? Did it catch you off guard that they did such a small scale kind of thing?
I think it's something I would have expected from a demo of server meshing. Maybe a little bit larger. I would have hoped like more zones and seeing how it would work with more clients, I guess.
So you would have expected them to go a little further?
Yeah, maybe. But as I have said, it's only working like for a couple of weeks. So maybe that's all they got for now, which is, I think, fine. But yeah, I think it was nice to see the server handoffs. Like that was one of the main points, right? That has to work.
Having the nested authority handoff working was actually pretty useful. What I mean by that is you and someone else sitting in the gray cat going across the server and it handling that correctly with the authority handover. That's not an easy problem.
Yep.
I thought
and
it was
also like the shooting, interacting between servers. I think that was also like one of the major selling points, right? Being able to see what's going on in other servers and interacting with them. So I think it was nice. I think had some child proving to do, but like the little nitpicks I saw. But sometimes I think the authority handoffs didn't always work, and that might have messed up some of the replication. But I can't quite put where the problem was. But yeah, I'm sure they figured it out.
Yeah, I think they've got the time. They've got the smarts there. I will say that you know what? I don't remember what I will say anymore. Can I go back to what you were saying though, Panic? You said that Battle Royale games should be looking at this closely. Why haven't they done this? I heard that Unreal Engine 5 could do this and more, and that Star Citizen should be developed on that engine. So why isn't Fortnite using server meshing, Panic?
Because it's hard. No one wants to be the first one to put out the technology. If Unreal had figured it out, they would have been selling it way harder than they already are. It's like I said, there's a lot of those things that you kind of have to work out, and you kind of have to build your game to be aware of it from the beginning. Retrofitting it's not a simple thing. Changing your data format and structure so that it's streamable is not a simple thing. Most battle royales right now, you load your static map. You have your map, and you load your 100 players in, and they are on one server or one instance of a server or one slice of a server, and they'll play their game for 40 minutes, and then they'll leave. And then the server will refresh, and then they'll go again. It's not really like a persistent world compared to Star Citizen, which has got that scaling problem of its own, where that server world is there. Like it's not going to cycle out once they finish doing it properly. Like that server world is what you're going to have.
It's actually quite funny. I know that there's like the Space Race solution for like I think they also started around the time Star Citizen pursued this server meshing. And I think there's a plugin for Unreal for a while now, so you can incorporate this Space Race into Unreal. I think Scavengers, maybe another game, actually works that way.
Yeah.
But I also heard like it's notoriously difficult to work with. But I'm not sure if that's was it like just an opinion or if it's actually true. And what's the reason for that? But yeah,
Well,
it's interesting.
from what I heard, spatial OS is kind of not a thing anymore. Like Scavenger shut down, I think, last year.
Mm. Yeah,
And
it's interesting because there were so many games built on Spatialos, but I think none of them actually released. Which is, I wonder what happened there. And I
that
think
was
they are going more on the road from military simulations, and I think metaverse stuff. I don't know actually
well,
what they do now.
it also sounds like it's expensive. Server meshing requires you to pay for a lot of servers and a lot of data transfer. And like,
Yeah.
obviously, you need a company that's going to get criticized for raking in constant money to be able to pay for it. Because CIG, they make a lot of money, but when you look at the amount of stuff that they're paying for, it doesn't really come out to that much. And I think it sounds like that's only going to continue to go up as they have to start doing this stuff and paying for javelins by the quarter,
Well, we should talk about that because that's the next that's where that is ultimately, I think, the biggest next step for figuring out how to do dynamic meshing. Because static meshing, right now, Amazon's got the concept of EC2 instances, which are pretty much fixed size servers that are virtual servers that you can, pick the spec and spin them up. And they have a concept called, it's a common one on the industries that use cloud, is called infrastructure as code, right? What that means is that as part of your code, when you're building your technology and stuff, part of your code is how to deploy your platform and scale your platform on the fly depending on certain conditions. So you can be like, when I reach a certain percent of load, I would like to spin up another EC2 instance of, this resource spec for this. And then once this is running, I will migrate stuff from one EC2 to another one, spin down that one. And, you might spin up bigger ones or smaller ones. And they have different cost profiles for those. There's also like sub services in Amazon for your database services can be certain size and you kind of have to scale them. And that's quite the literal sense of scaling. And you'll have different services. So like one of the things I was talking about and Unobtanium was kind of alluding to was improving server tick rate. One of the things CIG has been doing, and you'll see these words in a lot of their patch notes and a lot of their talks, which might not register, but for tech folks they do, is they say, we're deploying a new service. Like, what is a service?
I ask
Usually
that.
that's, yeah, it's like, so you have applications, which are usually something that will run in like one place. A service is usually like this ethereal thing that you will just have like an access point or an endpoint that you'll talk, or like you'll just say, if I need something from the service, I'm going to send a certain request to an endpoint and the service will respond back to me. That service isn't necessarily on one machine. It's usually a collection of machines or a load balance thing out in the cloud. And air traffic controller, the ATC system, was a big one that they've been talking about. That was originally handled by every single dedicated game server. Each of them maintain their own ATC, which means that's some memory and some CPU cycles on each server or that you're playing on was maintaining. When they turn that into an ATC service, that means they have this data, this chunk of data, and this compute elsewhere. And now each DGS, instead of having to maintain it itself, will just send a request out into the cloud and the cloud will respond back. That has two knock on effects. One, there might be some latency when you go talk to the other service. But number two, you've now freed up a whole bunch of stuff on all of your dedicated game servers that you don't necessarily have to pay for on each of those instances because you have like a smaller, more efficient service handling it, right? And they've talked about it for various things that they are doing these things. Quanta is another one of those services, and a whole variety of these. So meshing ultimately is also kind of going to have to be one of these services, right? Because they're going to have triggers for when do I know I need to split off Stanton to be 4 different servers for like each landing zone, or do I need to go smaller? If someone spawns a javelin, they have to make a design decision on, do I leave the javelin on a server with a bunch of other javelins and I only spawn it onto its own server when there's 80 people on board? Like, they have to figure out the answer to these questions. Now, they can iterate on that with time. Like, they can do static server meshing. Based on what I saw, they can probably get that done on the timeline they talked about, right? Next 12
What was
months.
that time? Okay, yeah, 12 months.
I'm
I don't
I'm
remember
pretty
what they
sure.
said. If
Yeah,
anything.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be Q1 March for Pyro for like the static mesh, but I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt and just give them the 12-month timeline for that
You
one.
think they're aiming for Q1 though?
I think they're aiming for Pyro in Q1 to be a static mesh. Stanton one server, Pyro another one.
With jump points and all that.
Yes, I think that's what they were aiming for too. I don't know if they'll make that, but I'm pretty sure they'll be able to make that from what they showed in the demo. They should be able to do that in 12 months, I think.
How about
I would.
how about you, Unobtanium? Just sorry to interrupt, but
No, it's all good.
I'm interested in hearing both of your thoughts on that timeline.
For static server meshing for the first one.
Yeah, simple connection between Pyro and Stanton.
Yeah, I think it will be a bit simpler than what we saw in the demo. So maybe they can release something like authority transfers in jump points sooner.
Yeah.
Because like if it's happening in the jump point and we are forced to drive through it, then there's not much interaction that can happen across those servers. So I think they can get away with some simpler solution, I guess. So
Earlier
the demo
this-
they showed is a harder case.
Yeah, definitely.
Earlier this year, they mentioned the two servers being DGS and then the jump point being its own, right?
That's not how I understood it. I think that it was just different zones, like how we saw it. Like Stanton is one zone, and then the wormhole of the jump point is one zone, and then Pyro as well.
Yeah,
so 3 zones.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have
like
to think about. Yeah, you would have to think about which server takes over the wormhole zone, or if maybe the wormhole itself is split into two zones, and then one server can take up one half and the other server the other half.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's how I understood it.
Okay. Well, going back to Panic, what you've been describing is kind of leaning more into the dynamic server meshing stuff, talking about where they would define their transitions.
That's the secret sauce everyone wants.
Right. That's static server meshing is one thing. Dynamic is another. How about let's define that, because we sort of jump straight into to server meshing. There's multiple steps that they're working towards right now. Why don't we go through each one? Let's start with talking about what this replication layer is doing with the crash recovery and how that works into server meshing. Let's go from there and then talk about kind of moving into Stanton and Pyro being their own servers, and then we can get to the dynamic section. So can you guys run us through kind of how the replication layer fits into all this, what that actually does?
I mean, the replication layer sits between the clients and the servers, right? Or will be. Like, this is what's going to happen soon. Currently, the replication layer still is part of the game server. So splitting that out on its own server and having everybody connect to that is going to enable server crash recovery. So the connection between the replication layer and the client can stay up if a server crashes. So only the connection between the crashed server and the replication layer goes down.
And we're basically expecting that to be like what they showed during CitizenCon, right? He crashed the server and nothing happened.
Exactly. Yeah, we got like this weird limbo state where other players didn't move anymore, but we could loosely interact with the world. But then when the server came up again, it like snapped back to the previous state of when the server crash happened. And then it continued again.
I call that the M&M effect, where you snap back to reality.
Exactly.
I cannot wait for that. That's going to be in 3.21.1. Are they testing that?
I think it's the preview channel, right? No, they're testing it now. Okay.
That's in the
I'm still confused.
Is it currently in the preview channel, or they were going to do it soon?
I think a future one.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's confusing.
But that is something that is coming it's not in the future. This is not a soon TM thing. This is testing in players' hands within a week of this episode coming out. 30Ks might be a much less big, much smaller of a problem by the end of the year.
So
Yeah,
I can explain at
it's
a high level how it works because it's actually important to kind of talk about that because effectively right now today when you connect to Robert Space Industries launch or launch into the game and click your persistent universe button, you effectively get paired onto a particular server and your connection is directly to that server. So when that server disappears, your 30K is effectively you not getting a response from the server for a period of time, commonly known as a timeout, and then it just disconnects you and then you're back to your desktop, right? With the replication layer, it works as one of these ephemeral services we've been talking about, where you connect to when you hit the persistent universe button, you're talking to a service to say, I would like to connect to the game, and it puts you on the replication service. And the fun part about that is the servers are doing a very similar thing where they're like, I would like to be connected. I'm a live server now, and it will get connected to the replication service. And there will be some relationship pairing, which is kind of what they were alluding to in the demo, where like the entity graph database will just say you are paired to this server and this server is your authority, right? And then servers you are visible on will also have like a relationship to you so that they know to stream to you.
Yeah.
That's part of the entity database.
It's just not
Now,
authoritative.
yeah, exactly. So like now if a server disconnects, okay, you lose your entity connection to the server, whatever, but you're still connected to the replication layer and your client is still able to talk to the replication layer. So that's why you don't disconnect like you used to. And at some point, this whole dynamic server mesh thing, part of it is like a server can, you can have monitoring and stuff to detect, oh, this instance of the server has crashed or is not responsive for a certain period of time. Let me spin up another, EC2 or another, whatever they're using instance of the game. Let me reload everything that's supposed to be there based on my identity as this particular server. And then let me reconnect to the replication layer under this identifier that I am this server. And then when that happens, which takes, anywhere from a few seconds to maybe 30, 40, 50 seconds, however long it takes. And then it will be like, oh, this server is back. This player is attached to the server. Let me reattach them. And then, they go about their business and you snap back to reality. Which I think is a game changing thing for most games. Usually they'll just disconnect you.
Yeah, I really can't wait for, 30Ks are like, obviously there are other problems besides 30Ks. But man, it's, it really is going to be nice. That's one of like the janky parts. That's like the frame rates, the interaction problems, and the server crashes are really the things that break up your gameplay so much. So this would be an amazing way to get that taken care of. Now I'm hearing in chat that they actually have said there will be no testing on the EPTU. It'll only be tech preview. So I'm being told that this will not be happening within a week of this podcast, but it should be happening sometime soon. The replication layer in general is going to be, I think, a pretty big deal for the game. Not one that like we really were told about that as much as server meshing or PES, but it's become a bigger topic recently. Let's see. So that's the replication layer. I think we kind of covered that fairly well. It really acts as that separation between the client's server data and the one true timeline that keeps them all synced up. Now, moving on from
the TVA.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. Now, once we move past that, they get replication layer separated. Things are moving smoothly. Fingers crossed that's the end of this year. They start to move to static server meshing. What, from your guys' understanding, is kind of their goal with that step?
I mean, getting pyro online, right? But like being able to add more than one servers to the replication layer is going to be part of that on the technical front. And then, being able to assign authority to these different servers, like assigning pyro to one and stand to the other.
I think that'll be the first easy step.
Yeah.
In my heart of hearts and my hope of hopes is that early next year, we get the system-to-system static mesh. And then I'm really hoping by maybe the end of next year, we get still static, but that they can be like Stanton is, 3 servers, right? Get the player count on Stanton up to like, 300-400 people.
That would be
right?
amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Because that from a static perspective, they have a lot of data on how people travel in Stanton, so they could theoretically set up a static mesh within system to be like Orison got its Orison and its surrounding OMs and like the Lagrange stations, one server, and like Microtext another one. No one cares about Lorville, so they can just delete that.
Leave that out.
Forget about Hurston.
Yeah, but they can figure that out, I think. And I feel like they would do that as like before they do the dynamic, they'd want to set that up just to kind of see how the transit works around it, and they can iron out bugs. And then eventually they can just be like, oh, if there's only like 5 people on Microtech, just have the area that it's covering be a lot larger. And then like, as it reaches certain speed bumps of people going there, just maybe move it on to its own server. And then they can like play around with that within Stanton pretty easily, I think.
Yeah. Do you think that would be an immediate jump in FPS if they're decreasing the size
Massive.
of servers? Yeah.
Massive. Like if you think about it, like right now, a DGS has to hold all of Stanton,
Right.
even if there's no one there, right? It will stream stuff out to an extent, but it still has to maintain all of that, which is a huge chunk of memory. But if now they are able to maintain the entity state of the entire system elsewhere, and then they can just spin up a server to handle parts of it when people are there, I would 100% see them being able to have like 100. You can probably have a 200-person server on just Orison, right? And because it's like the server doesn't have to maintain a huge area, just got to maintain the people and what they're doing there. And I think like I don't necessarily think you'll see thousands, but 8,000 maybe for Stanton, which would be pretty sick. Because those 1,000 people are not going to be in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, 1,000
try
people
to
in Stanton. Honestly, I know we've kind of hypothetically talked about, oh yeah, thousands of people on a planet and all that stuff. 1,000 people in a single star system, though, looking at what happens when you have 100 right now, it wouldn't be the most dense MMO, but it would certainly lead to a lot of interesting interactions, running into people constantly. And then also you'd have 9 times as many AI being simulated in the space. So a lot of missions and stuff too. I mean, is that really what we're looking at? As simple as going from this to a static meshed Stanton? Well,
that's the big one, right? If you have Orison and that not Orison, Crusader and that surrounding area of just small amount that has to be there for the 100-something odd people, all of that space that used to do Microtech, Lorville, Hurston and ArcCorp, that can now be devoted to running AI and beacons and stuff in that small area. Right. You can have a much denser, more robust like experience in that area and just like scale it that way, which I think would be pretty awesome. Like AI working would be insane.
So what would be the limiting factor here in your guys' opinions?
Cost?
Server cost? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a static
economic.
mesh, it's still dynamic. And the server cost is the sense that like the static mesh is just saying you will explicitly denote which areas are which. You still have to like run the servers for them. The dynamic part of that is just like having code to just be like spin up another one, spin it down, move it around. It's still just it's a cost function there.
Okay.
Servers are not super expensive, especially like for a game where you're just like paying by, like in AWS, it's really not that expensive. It just stacks up if you have to do a lot at the same time. So yeah, I mean, it's cost. And what else would you think on Unobtanium? I'm not sure what else there would be limitations.
Yeah, I think economic viability, right? Somehow the game has to be profitable to pay for the servers at least. And I think, of course, then the client performance is going to be the final frontier.
That's why you're not going to have thousands of people together in one place. Client won't handle it.
Okay.
Probably, yeah. I think also just to make sure, like we mentioned FPS previously, that it will be improved by static server meshing. We are talking about the tick rate on the server, right?
Right.
Not,
yes.
our FPS, like images on screen. So
Well, I mean, static
we
FPS
have
for
to
the
be careful
servers,
there.
I think they said they were only aiming for 30 anyway, right? Or
Yeah,
has that
exactly.
changed?
Yeah,
Mm.
no.
A 30 FPS tick rate is not
Also,
really absurd. It's not really like ultra competitive FPS either.
I heard or read, I think was it monthly report that they were tried out testing with 60 FPS. I'm not sure if that was like in general or some physics related. I don't remember exactly.
I know
But yeah,
the cloth simulations are using
or 120.
120
Yeah,
FPS. Yeah.
yeah,
I
and
think
it's like
certain
decoupled from the normal ones.
Yeah, certain ones they'll do different tick rates for that. Like the physics sim, I believe, would have to also run on the server. Cloth sim, not so much.
Yeah,
Like Cloth
it's
sim is
just
a client side
client-side.
120. Physics, I would think, is a big one that they would probably have to run at 60 FPS or it would look weird to your eyes. The most like the tick rate when I'm talking like server tick rate, it's in the CS:GO sense of how fast it's like registering hits and movement and stuff. 30 FPS is not the greatest, but it's still pretty good for a massively online game.
Better than what we've had.
Yeah, and I would also think that that would allow them to do a pretty robust amount of things at the same time.
I'm seeing in chat that it sounds like they did run a 60 FPS server test on Arena Commander. So that might be
I
what
feel
you were
like
reading.
I feel like Arena Commander will
That
be
makes
end up
sense.
being. I feel like Arena Commander would end up being a 60 FPS thing, because that would be much easier to do. It's a much smaller universe.
Yeah.
You are paying attention to the granularity a lot more. I figure if they do Theaters of War, they would want to do a Theaters of War Arena Commander thing at 60 FPS.
I would be.
I think it can also be a lot more competitive, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the PU, you have a lot of random variables, but in Arena Commander, you can have like more isolated encounters, like
I would think
standard FPS. Yeah.
I would think people would be happy to be on the Arena Commander team. A little simpler, maybe. I don't know.
Yep.
So we've gone over replication layer, static server meshing. Now let's jump back into dynamic server meshing a little bit. That's the holy grail, the thing that really sounds like has never been done explicitly.
No.
And is supposed to eventually allow for them to do things like allow capital ships to be their own moving servers. What do you guys think of the outlook for that?
I think they could do that with static server meshing already, right? Could already.
That's kind of cost prohibitive, though.
Yeah, of course. They said that they would have an algorithm, even under dynamic server meshing, where they would have to look if it's like Javelin on one server, if there's still performance left, they would add like other areas of the level to that server. Yeah. But I think it's interesting. We saw like for static server meshing, like the authority transfers of individual entities between the zones, right? Like moving between the zones. And then dynamic server meshing has a twist to that, like actually moving the entire zone onto a different server. And I think, that's how it's best portrayed.
Yeah.
We kind of,
yeah, I would say the Javelin having 80 people is the tricky part that they have to figure out, because in and of itself, if you're inside the Javelin, it would probably be a server for the people inside, right? Outside world, they would just have to have your Javelin entity that gets streamed across, which is fairly trivial.
Yeah, just one entity. Yeah.
Until you start shooting from the turrets.
Well, not even then. That's like only the people who are seeing outside. It's just like they get replication layer information. My part is, how do you handle if a Javelin docks at a station and then you have 80 people run off the ship? Like, how does the server handle that? You know, because you have, say, 80 people going off of a Javelin server onto like a space station, right? Like, what happens to that server if there was like already 100 people in that area?
Yeah. I think that would be interesting to see, actually, like seeing the server follow this group of people, like the zones being assigned where the group is moving at. I think that would be a nice demo for dynamic server meshing.
Yeah, we're gonna break the crap out of this system.
Because I'm just like, if you're on a Javelin, right, with 80 people, and you go to Orison and you go to dock at Seraphim Station, right? Orson has probably got a relative population of people in the Crusader area doing stuff, right? 100 people, 150 people, say. You know, like we were saying, what happens to that server? Like, do you run off the Javelin onto a different instance? or like what happens there?
Yeah.
Because now you've gone from 150 to 230 people. Like, does it like make the area smaller and like move people off? Like,
There's so
that's the
many,
kind of thing they
yeah.
have to figure out.
There's going to be a lot of, I imagine the dynamic server meshing testing and figuring out segments going to be a lot longer than replication layer or static meshing. What do you guys think in terms of, you said you could see static server meshing having as early as first quarter next year. Let's say static does okay, comes in this upcoming summer. Spitballing, what do you guys think would be, how long
For
do you think it
dynamic,
would take for dynamic to get stable? Yeah.
They can
stable.
do
I don't know.
they can do different variations of dynamic pretty early. Like,
Hmm.
you can take a static implementation and make it dynamic, which literally just some infrastructure code for like, you just have to give it some holistic approach on when to spin up another part of the spin up another server and what zone to give it and when to spin it down. Like, I would say they'd probably want to like we were talking about that Stanton example earlier. They would probably just want to like static mesh Stanton into multiple servers for a while, and then using the quanta data that they've showed they can gather on people's movements and what they're doing, they can probably do a bunch of data analysis to be like, oh, when we're seeing these patterns, it indicates that there might be more people going to another location, or if there's like an event, we can spin up another server. And they can do it in like a much like larger, less granular level for like a system first, and be like, let's do some dynamic meshing in Stanton, figure out how to do it, and then eventually they can start getting like more granular on like, let's do it on a station by station basis. After that, maybe like, oh, let's do it on like, they'll go from first like zones of the system to like planetary systems to like moons, and they can figure out how to like kind of do that based on the data they collect. So like, when I said next year, end of year, maybe we'll see a static Stanton, they might have a dynamic version of that where it's, not like a big mesh, where they have hundreds of servers. They might be like, oh, we'll just figure out how to mesh Stanton into 3 or 4 servers instead of one, and do that dynamically. Like,
That'd be
it's
cool.
one of those it's one of those problems you can iterate on pretty non-destructively
Okay.
Yeah.
if you have the replication layer working.
Yeah, I agree. I think the first dynamic version may be able to have moving servers, like take over different areas, but it doesn't necessarily have to be more servers are added or removed dynamically. Like, these are maybe different features which can be deployed over time. Yeah. I'm also interested in once we get to dynamic server meshing and getting to higher number of servers and players, then like this new replication layer version 2 comes up. They already mentioned that this is going to be something they want to work on. I think that's going to be exciting as well.
Well, there's one other interesting part that we should probably talk with the dynamic part, which is, since we were talking about cost, right now their cost is broken up on the function of division of what's 150 players per server right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
their
roughly.
their cost is broken up
It's
by
variable.
how many servers they need is their player base divided by 150, right? If they get this sort of dynamic system level meshing working, they don't necessarily need to spin up, the same number of servers as that. They can be like, okay, yeah, we have players who congregate in these areas. Um, those 150 players could be technically consolidated onto, fewer servers than before. So they'll get some cost savings there. But at the same time, we don't have to maintain a bunch of different, shards, as they were talking about, where like there you end up on like a different world than when you were on before, because now they can just be like, oh, we need more capacity in microtech, or we need more capacity. You spin up a server there and you have the people there, but it's the same microtech that everyone else was on before.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's going to be interesting to see how because they'll balance the number of shards, the number of regions versus the number of servers. So like, I think we'll see a lot less of a disjointed experience in Star Citizen. Because like right now, if you disconnect, right, you might not end up where your ship was, like when you lost your cargo.
Yeah.
But I feel like as they get this working, you'll be more likely to end up, because there'll be less copies of the world running around. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting thought experiment.
Well, after kind of reviewing the whole process, this is going to be probably more back-end things they try to do to optimize the game after even dynamic server meshing,
Oh, yeah.
which will be introduced to in due time, I'm sure. Let's wrap things up here by really, I just want to hear your honest opinions on whether your outlook on all of this server meshing, Star Citizen as a whole, and this project's direction has changed over the year after, let's say, before and after PES, and now before and after CitizenCon. What's that sort of? Has there been any change in your outlook? Have you been pretty confident the whole time?
Go ahead.
You can go first, sir.
All
You go
right.
first.
Yeah, I was hoping you could start and I could take some more thought into my response. But yeah, I think I've got a little bit jaded in recent times because I think this idea of one world where everybody plays in, I'm not sure if dynamic server meshing is going to solve that or enable that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it has to be some form of instancing eventually, I think. So yeah, I'm interested in how that will work with dynamic server meshing. So I think there's still something to be gained there. So it won't be like exactly how existing MMOs are doing it. I think there's definitely an advantage to having dynamic server meshing. Yeah. In regards to recent developments, I think I'm very optimistic that dynamic server meshing is possible. Yeah, it's more of a question how far it can be scaled.
So you were you were thinking it was going to be bigger, and now you've kind of toned back expectations to more of like a regional shard kind of system.
Yeah, definitely regional, but even then, I am wondering if like if like 50,000 players are in one shard, how that would turn out. Like if one streamer makes an event or is streaming, then I'm expecting that a lot of people show up in that area, and it will be easily a couple thousand probably, depending on the streamer's popularity. So yeah, I think it has to be like instance, and I'm worried a little bit about gameplay implications in that regard. But yeah,
right, yeah, base
anyway.
building and things are obviously offer a lot of questions when it comes to server meshing and shards.
It's also an open question.
Yeah, I have to agree with you.
When we get to it, I guess.
I have to agree with you there. Obviously server meshing sounds like it's going to make things a lot bigger and more scaled than a lot of other games, but at the same time, it's like how many thousands of players can you really have in one place? Like you said, we're going to be limited on the client side at some point.
We have to think of the clients.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions and uncertainty that's still there. I hope that this episode has helped people get a little more clarity and maybe be able to theorize that kind of stuff with more information on their own end, but there's still plenty of questions in the air. Panic, how do you feel? How are you feeling throughout the year looking at all this?
I think when I was on the Greenhouse podcast, like near the beginning of the year, I was one of the few that are saying like, I think they'll meet their targets that they had put out for the year. And I think they're close. I'm actually think they're a little further ahead with the meshing demo. That being kind of where they are, I think is a big step forward. And I think it should kind of settle a lot of concerns on the can it be done side of things. Like for me, it did, like showing that they had it working, at least even on a local machine, which has its own kind of quirks of its own. I don't think it's insurmountable for them to figure out the kind of network level stuff when they put it on multiple machines. So I'm optimistic in that regard. I do agree with what Unobtanium was saying was, I don't ever think one world was feasible. Just because there's the speed of light, and, you know, playing across Europe and the US and Australia, like there's just certain, quality of life things that current technology just does not resolve. So I feel like there will always be regional worlds, like you'll have a US world, Europe world. I don't necessarily know if you'll have a US East versus US West type of thing, but I foresee that being a thing also, just for kind of latency and keeping the game experience good. The base building, and I saw some posts on Spectrum, which really started making me think more. Because I was wondering, was just like, if I build a base, right, and I invest my time, blood, sweat, and tears, my friends do it, right? How does that work if, someone else from another region goes to that same area? How does that work, in that regard? Like, so those are like some of the questions, like for me, as like putting my design hat on, I don't have good answers for. Those are like hard questions that CIG needs to figure out and answer. But more importantly, they'll need to like communicate that out effectively. Because the other part is no matter how they communicate that out, they're gonna make people upset in some way, shape, or form, because that's generally how it always goes.
Yeah.
But like those are like the tough decisions they're gonna have to make. That said, I'm optimistic on like at least they've put to bed, is it possible? Probably. It used to be like, oh, a lot of people would be like, oh, I don't think it's going to be possible. They're not going to be able to do it. I think a lot of people are like, yeah, they can probably do it. It's probably not going to look like what I thought it was going to, but could be pretty cool.
Star Citizen
I
can
think
be an
people are more
MMO.
upbeat. Yeah, it can be an MMO,
Yeah.
I would say.
That was always sort of, hey, you guys are putting together all this stuff, but is this actually going to be massive? Is this actually going to have a lot of people together? And I think,
is it like a battle royale in a star system versus, actually, MMO in a star system?
Yeah. And it feels like they've reached that point where at least they've proven the tech is there. But yeah, the base building, the difficult questions. I mean, we didn't touch on a lot of the harder edge cases that are going to come up with this system.
We'll think about that next year.
Yeah, that's next year kind of thing. We're still fawning over the fact that it might actually happen.
I'm fawning over the fact that there's pyro.
That too. We actually, so I thought I was going to finish off with that last question, but I got a little extra. I got a little bonus for you all. One final question to finish us off. The quantum economy was not at CitizenCon, and it was a huge question for a lot of people. We've heard some stuff since CitizenCon about it, and as a big part of the engine, I wanted to ask you guys before we finished off if you had any thoughts on what we did or did not hear, and where the game might be going regarding that.
I'm going to ask you a question in follow-up.
Okay.
Because, boy, do you want me to like go in on it? Like, do you want me to talk about it, or do you want me to keep it quick?
Well, we got to get to the Q&A. I don't want to take too much of your guys' time.
Okay.
But give me the short and dirty of like what you're feeling.
All right, because like I build like the quantum stuff is like the kind of stuff I build for like my job. Like I understand this stuff pretty well.
Okay. So I got to bring
like,
you back on for another episode.
Yeah, you could do that if you want. But high level, when I read that, I was just like, that is a very mature decision from CIG, right? The reason being,
what is that decision? Just for context.
It's a very to pause Quanta for now, right? Because they've demoed that they have built the simulation and that they have a lot of tools to visualize it, and then they also demoed that it's running in the background now and it can see all the game data coming in, right? And so when Benoit said it's in a good place, so we're pausing, I agree with that. The reason being, right? Everyone has been complaining for years that there's not enough gameplay mechanics in the game, right? And Quanta is this overarching thing that runs the game economy. From a technical level, all Quanta really is another service, and it needs an API, which is a programmer interface, for how to get data into it and get data out of it. Now, Benoit also said the reason we're pausing is we have to build a lot of gameplay systems. So when they're building them, they have to figure out what data they have to put in. They have to figure out what data they need to take out, and they need to figure out what data they need to generate for each of these systems: repair, salvage, mining, refueling, refining. All of these things need to figure all of that out, right? Now, they could like shoehorn stuff into Quanta and let's have it start doing stuff, but then you have to go in and rewrite all of that.
Yeah.
If they build all of these mechanics and just like give it some flat data to start with, they can build the mechanics, get them in our hands, and then they can just go back and be like, okay, for salvage, I need to have these API endpoints on Quanta so that Quanta can generate this data and then send it out and the service can consume it. And they can, instead of doing it one at a time, they can be like, all right, we built like 15 game mechanics. We know exactly what we need to do on the API. We can like each patch, we can just start hooking this up to Quanta and like build it up. And like all this time while they're doing it, they have Quanta just collecting data from what players are doing. Like Quanta can see it, and then they can look at it and tune it. Because if Quanta can see the data, Quanta can generate output for them to be like, the simulation is saying if the players are doing this, it would want to do this. Do I like that it wants to do that, or do I want to adjust what it's going to do? And they can do all of that tuning without necessarily having to break the game. They can like figure out and like tune the knobs.
But I would like for us to be able to know they're doing that tuning. You know, we don't hear anything about Quantum. They didn't even tell us they were.
They built the economy team. That's pretty much what they're going to be doing.
Yeah. So like, that's what I'm saying. I want to keep hearing updates from the economy team on that, because we were in the dark for quite a while. And at one point, Tony was saying, I think something similar to the idea of after we do the refuel and that kind of balancing on the Quantum side, we will be adding in things with every patch subsequently. And that didn't.
I think they changed their mind because they realized we could add things in with every patch, or we can build the systems and work out our data beforehand, and then they can give them more, like, instead of having to go back in. Because the problem with software is if you build an API and then you keep updating it, you have to keep going back to fix it because you might break other things, versus if you know your like all of your requirements for your API before you build it, you can build it all at once and then you can connect it in pieces, and it's a lot less break fix. Like you can actually deliver the functionality a lot faster by not working on it at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird and unintuitive, but it's kind of the reality of not having to go back and fix it all the time.
Well, and I'm completely fine with that. My problem was that they didn't tell us. And it was similar to the iCache problem. Yeah. So like,
they should have said it.
I'm glad that they are talking about it now. I feel like I'm saying that about a dozen different things after this year, but I do not want to see them kind of just dropping it and not telling us anything about it again. So I'm glad we got the economy team now. They're giving us updates on the monthly report. I hope they continue. Unobtanium, did you have any insight onto the quantum economy and kind of what's going on there?
Not that much. But yeah, because it's not quite the engine I'm interested in, right? But it like interfaces with PES, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm most excited about this virtual NPCs, more so than the Quantas, because like this bounty hunter gameplay they demoed. I thought that was quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I can understand that they want to put it on hold for now until they know that it will have an actual impact, like gameplay is there, content is there, which can be used by the servers, so that Quanta has an actual impact and it's not just this thing that does something little minor. And I think they want to have it be impactful.
I do wonder if we'll see bounty hunting get delayed because of this. If with the quantum simulation, they're also going to maybe put away virtual AI implementation until later and therefore kind of hold off on bounty hunting V2.
Would be interesting if they could release that first before the entire economy.
I think we'll get bounty hunting V2 with players first, like player versus player bounties, and then they can probably extend that to AI after the fact.
Maybe, yeah. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap things up. This has been a great talk about server meshing the engine that's running Star Citizen that they took 10 years to make and continue to work on. But we are now seeing start to bring in some actual changes to the game. And with the replication layer happening this quarter, static server meshing hopefully sometime first half of next year, this is like the most exciting, most substantial the state of Star Citizen's ever been. So thanks for coming on and talking about it, giving us some more info and helping to explain that to people. If you could, if you have content that you'd like to share or a place you want to point people in the direction of, please feel free to plug yourself right now. Unobtanium, I know you've got your website. Feel free to tell people what you work on.
Yeah, sure. I guess you can find me on Spectrum. There's like this unofficial Road to Dynamic Server Meshing post. You can also go straight to server meshing wiki or something. I actually don't know.
server-meshing-meshing.com.
.info.
.info.
I'm sure I can put in the comments, I guess.
It'll be linked in the show notes down below. Don't
exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I maintain it. I try to at least have a look. Also at the sources. I think the sources, official sources, are quite insightful. And yeah, if
Yeah,
you
it's a good
can reach out to
resource.
me on the Spectrum post if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer.
Cool. Well, thank you. And Panic?
I'm retired from that content creator life, so you can just find me on Twitter at PanicSwitched with a 1 on the switched. Alternatively, you can just find me on Discord. I don't produce much content these days. I'm very much just a consumer of content and player of games, and I very much enjoy that lifestyle.
It's a good lifestyle. You can find him in our Discord server, our lovely community. He is a great voice there. He talks about this kind of stuff as well as other Star Citizen stuff. You can also find a huge, vibrant community. I'm looking right now at our supporters audience for this live show, and I'm reading 16 people we have chilling here live. Thanks for joining us, everybody. If you didn't know, folks, all of our supporters, Twitch, Ko-fi, Patreon, YouTube, anybody is able to come and join these podcasts live and listen to our before and after chats, which are a little more intimate. Sometimes we're sharing some tea, some drama, you never know. So I encourage you to come join us on Discord, hang out with the community, make some friends, play some Star Citizen, talk some crap. Either way, this has been the Launch Sequence podcast. We'll be getting into the Q&A after this, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. But thank you for coming and watching this or listening on your favorite audio podcast platform if you did. Appreciate you all. I'll see you all next week.